I think everybody's got something inside of them that they are probably better at than most of the other people in the world. We're wired to pick up safety and security concerns above everything else. First lessons top performers in any industry sort of discover is that if you go right at the thing you're most afraid of, that's where all your superpowers lie. You just have to learn to take risks over and over and over again.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I have a special guest with me today. I'm super excited. He's got a new book called The Future is Faster Than You Think. Steven Kotler in the house. This book is wild. It talks about the future of pretty much every single industry, health, government, business, finance, all of it. I'm here to pick his big brain and see what we can learn. Steven, welcome aboard, man.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
So my audience is mostly entrepreneurs, either people are in business or want to be entrepreneurs. What do you hope people take from this book? Because there's so many different paths you can go down and so many macro trends you're talking about. What's the big takeaway you'd think for entrepreneurs?
You know, it's funny. I think if you ask me, if you ask my co-writer, Peter Diamandis, you know, who we really wrote this book for, I think entrepreneurs, they always top our lists. And the reason is, as you pointed out, the book maps out the change we're going to see over the next 10 years in every industry, and it's massive, right? The overwhelming impact of the book on most people is, holy crap, I can't believe how much change is coming, right? And if you sort of work the numbers, it's roughly 100 years worth of technological change shrunk into 10 years. The upside of that for entrepreneurs is we believe more wealth is going to be created over the next 10 years than we've seen over the past 100. There's massive, massive amounts of opportunity. And the reason is the book really tracks a bunch of different exponentially accelerating technologies, right? So technologies that are doubling in power on a regular basis, Moore's law being the classic examples that says our transistors get twice as fast, right, every 18 months or so. And the cost stays the same. So this same force is showing up in 10 or 11 different exponential technologies. What we know for starters is whenever a technology goes exponential, we basically find an internet-sized opportunity inside, right? And while the internet took a bunch of jobs, it created 2.6 jobs for every one it took, right? So there was a lot of entrepreneurship built on top of that. The same thing is happening with all these exponentials, but right now, over the next 10 years, instead of just individually lines of accelerated exponentials, they're starting to converge, right? AI, very powerful technology. Robotics, very powerful technology. You put them together and suddenly tens of millions of US jobs are threatened. Right? So when you get converging exponentials, the size of the disruption increases. Is this good news for traditional companies? No. Traditional companies are going to have to adapt to a rate of change and a speed of change, a level of change like they've never seen before, and they're not really built for that. But entrepreneurs are exactly built for that. So I think for entrepreneurs, it's an incredibly exciting time that we're going into.
You have these 7 forces that you talk about in the book, and one of my favorites was around genius. And if I can read a line, you said,
Please.
Until recently, most genius was squandered. Even if you were born with incredible talents, the chances of you being able to use those abilities was limited at best. One of the things I talk to a lot of people on my channel about, it's in almost every video, is I tell people that they're a genius, that you have Michael Jordan level talent at something, and you got to find it and then use it to go make an impact on the world. I kind of wish that was your whole book. I love that little section you have on there. Could you expand more on what you think about people's genius, being able to find it, and why now is a great time to be able to leverage it?
For sure. And there's the argument we're making is threefold. One is discovery, right? Well, opportunity and discovery. Until very recently, if you weren't white and male and wealthy, your chances of getting beyond a second grade education were extremely limited. That is no longer the case. Anybody with access to the internet, right, which is more and more, most of us, over 4 billion of us at this point, have all the information, all the education we could possibly desire free of charge. So that's starting to change. And as a result, more people are getting educated, for sure. More people who have genius within them are being able to tap into it. But even if you just kind of look at the standard, you know, number of geniuses that show up in any population, until recently, we couldn't find them, right? If you were born genius in the wrong location, in the wrong village, couldn't get access to the learning materials, couldn't blossom, and we couldn't find you anyhow, right? So giant networks means we can unearth genius way more often. And that's just, I think, part A. I think part B and C is most of the work Well, the other half of the work I do, besides working on disruptive technologies, I work on peak human performance. I study kind of the neurobiology of flow, which is an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. And all the like, I don't know how we're going to define genius, but we see massive amplification in cognitive skills when we move into flow. Motivation, learning, creativity, innovation, cooperation, collaboration, all these things go through the roof in flow. And what's really interesting is because biotechnology is moving so quickly, sensors are moving so quickly, AI is moving so quickly, this convergence, we are being able to kind of peel back the hood on flow, see where it's coming from, why it's coming, how do we get more of it. This is amazing for our ability to keep pace in an accelerated world. Flow appears to be about the only time that the brain kind of thinks at scale, can perform at speed. So it allows us to keep up. We get more genius as a result. And finally, brain-computer interfaces, right, are advancing at exponential speeds. And, you know, already we've got quadriplegics moving cursors with their mind inside of computers. They did an experiment essentially in telepathy where they sent signals from a research lab in France to the brain of somebody in India and back and forth. They played a video game for computers. We've now have movies that change depending on our brain waves. Stuff is getting more and more advanced. We're nowhere near prime time. We don't have AI in our brains anytime soon, but it's coming a lot faster than most people assume. So I think our ability to find more genius in the world, train that genius up, going way up. We're getting under the hood of what do we mean by genius? We're getting at the neurobiology. We're getting fantastic at training that up. And that short-term, long-term brain-computer interfaces, artificial intelligence, all these things can be tools that will unlock much more genius in us. So I think it's a triple answer, but I think it's cool.
Yeah. If we expand the definition of genius beyond just high IQ and maybe say everybody, or at least being able to be the best in the world at something, do you think that's accessible to everybody? Is it a certain percentage, like that people could be the best in the world at something, they just don't know what it is?
So I haven't, you know, I'm a science-based guy. I haven't seen a ton of data on what you're saying. That said, personal opinion, my experience in the real world, and certainly my experience, I spent the first 25 years of my career as a journalist, right? And going out into the world, and I specialized in those moments in time when the impossible became possible. So whether it was in business or technology or science or athletics, whenever we saw somebody do something that nobody thought was going to be done, right, I was often there trying to figure out why it was done, what the hell happened. And certainly all these people had something inside of themselves that nobody else had, and they had taken it much farther. And everything was very individual, right? Like what the impossible the person chose, it sort of always matched who they were when you saw it up close. It sort of made sense in that way. And I tend to, in a folk psychology kind of way, I agree with you. I think everybody's got something inside of them that they are probably better at than most of the other people in the world. Are they best top 5%? Probably. Are the top 1%? Doubtful, because there's probably a bunch of genetic stuff, nature, nurture stuff that weaves into it. But top 5%, yeah, I would start to believe that under the right conditions.
So why are people settling for a job at some company they hate instead of actually chasing down what their top 5% at?
I can't give you an easy answer, and I'm sure you've asked this question to a lot of people and gotten a lot of really smart answers, and I hope I'm not repeating too many of them. But I think it's, first of all, we have hardwiring problems. First and foremost, the brain takes in a ton of information every second, but the first stop most of that information makes is our danger detector, right? We're wired to pick up safety and security concerns above everything else. Money is a fundamental safety and security concern, and it eats at people. So people, and by the way, we process sort of physical danger in the same parts of the brain that we process financial danger, right? It's the same sort of thing. So we can't really tell the difference. Money fear is a primal safety and security concern. So one part of your answer is we get scared. And right, every single person I know, when I was coming up as a writer who was also chasing a creative dream, every person got derailed this way, right? They were chasing their dream. It was hard, and somebody offered them a job. like have an editor. You're a writer here, have an editor job. You're really, really talented. You can write on the side, but you can't. Suddenly you're an editor. You're not a writer. That's a real job with a full plate of responsibilities, but it does come with a paycheck. So you're safer, you're more secure. And I think that some version of that psychology is everywhere, right? Interestingly, my friend Philip Rosedale, who created Second Life, the virtual world, did a really interesting study of entrepreneurship and cities that foster entrepreneurship. And he was looking at conditions that led to it. And San Francisco was really at the top of the list, but not for the reasons that you would think. He ended up at the top of the list because if you were an entrepreneur and your company went out of business, you had the biggest, most robust network and the fastest way to get another job in San Francisco. So it was really safety and security. The city, because there was so much entrepreneurship, there were so many jobs go to floating around, was providing a safety net that entrepreneurs didn't have elsewhere. So I think fear is my first answer. There's a lot of long answers behind that, but you have to figure out how to negotiate that gauntlet.
So diving into fear, I'm curious about your perspective on this hack. When speaking on stage, there's a number of successful speakers who say, don't say you're nervous, say you're excited, because it's the same feeling in your body.
Yeah, it's the same neurochemistry. So it's not entirely true, but neurobiologically, fear and anxiety and excitement are both norepinephrine. So there's a really funny study they did at Harvard where they looked at, you might have heard this, they looked at, can you use breathing to down-regulate the nervous system to calm down versus reframing? And you're talking about reframing, right? So they had them say, hold that feeling of that fear, their anxiety in their body and say, I am excited 3 times out loud. And that massively outperformed trying to breathe your way into calm. And it's because the signals are the same. And reframing is a really powerful tool.
So I have a different kind of reframe, and maybe I'm just a weird duck, and I'm really curious about your perspective. So the reframe is typically you're nervous. No, you're not nervous. You're excited. For me, it's like, no, I'm nervous, and I do nervous things. Like I do the things that make me nervous, and that's where my self-confidence comes from.
I think that's true in everyone, and I think one of the first lessons top performers in any industry sort of discover is that if you go right at the thing you're most afraid of, that's where all your superpowers lie, right? Every one of your kryptonites becomes your superpowers. And it seems like we're sort of hardwired to make that transition. It's almost how we learn. So if you can't get comfortable with being uncomfortable, there's absolutely nothing you can do in kind of peak human performance. That's the sort of the foundational rule.
So when I hear, don't tell yourself you're nervous, you're excited, it feels like, at least for me, you're telling yourself that you're weak because you need this hack.
So you've come up against one of those really interesting paradoxes in peak performance, in human performance. And it's, so let me back into it a different way, but in positive psychology, we know one of the best ways to sort of take in more positive information instead of negative informations and sort of one of the best ways to impact happiness is a gratitude practice, right? Because it trains the brain to focus on the positive instead of the negative, but it doesn't focus on the imaginary positive. And that's why affirmations, the secret, don't work. It's because you've got a great internal bullshit detector. And if you're working at Walmart, you can't look in the mirror and say, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, because your brain is going, no, you're not. Clearly, you're not. It's like all evidence to the contrary, right? So reframing is a psychological trick. The truth of the matter is anxiety and excitement are the exact same signals, right? For you, though, it's a sign of weakness either way. And you've got an entirely different psychological construct around it. And this, like, you've built a bigger frame than the actual biology. That's how it works, right? So you've sort of changed the rules on yourself. So that particular system won't work for you. I tend to agree with you. And I tend to think there are a lot of different ways sort of to do that. I tend to think, I want to reframe. And if that doesn't work, right, if I'm still nervous, one of the next things I do is I ask myself, well, do I have enough information to be nervous, right? Am I nervous about a test I'm going to take 2 weeks from now? I haven't taken the test yet. So this is a false signal. It's letting me know I need to prepare. That's the information, nothing, right? So there are more steps that I will add into reframing underneath it, and I think sort of starts to solve your problem. But yeah, it's a paradox of even performance.
I love it. I mean, before going live, we were talking about the Doritos, and you asked me if Doritos sponsored this show or not, and explained, no, I have a Damn the Dorito strategy. The fact that if I want to eat healthy and I want to eat Doritos, the answer is not get rid of them from my house, but have them right in front of me all day long, because this makes me stronger, because strength comes from doing difficult things. I always couch it in like, I'm weird. I'm a weird duck. It may not work for you, but I'm curious about you're the expert on peak performance. What do you think?
So I always say, I think you just said something really, really wise. So the way I always explain it to people is that as a general rule, what works for me isn't going to work for you. And the reason is that personality built on nature and nurture doesn't tend to scale. Biology scales. So evolution designed us to perform at our best in a kind of a specific way. So thinkers going all the way back to William James, right? First American psychologist, wrote the first psychological textbook. He pointed out that the great thing in every education is to make your nervous system your ally rather than your enemy. And what he really means is a lot of what we mean by peak performance is getting your biology to work for you rather than against you. So if you can kind of work this stuff backwards to neurobiology, to mechanism, right? Basic mechanism, that does sort of work for everybody, right? But the minute you start, let me tell you how to live your life, and I'll give you like true story, personal story. I learned this such the hard way. Everybody who learns anything about peak performance makes the same mistake. You get a little wise, and then you start telling people, usually the people you love the most, how to live their lives, right? You just do it. It just happens. Learning comes with ego inflation. You're like, oh, I figured it out. Let me tell you how to live your life. In my case, when I had a couple years of kind of flow science under my belt, and, I nearly caused a divorce. I put 2 different people in the hospital. Like, I was the biggest disaster known to man. No, right? And I finally realized, I was like, well, I've got crazy, like, psycho work ethic. I've also got psycho Jewish neuroticism, a relentlessly Jewish, like my balance is very peculiar, and I'm really risk friendly. I like big risk. So that combination, all my shit was working for me. It was killing other people. And so I learned that lesson, that personality doesn't scale, biology scales, really early in my career, thank God. But I think, and I think it's one of the things that's wrong in a lot of the kind of the peak performance world right now, is people have magically figured out works for them. Great, that's fantastic. That's part of the game. But just because it works for you, it doesn't work for other people.
So the idea of saying, no, I'm nervous, I'm not excited, or damn the Doritos, is really different ways of saying, I like doing difficult things. Like, it's difficult, I want to jump into it. So, is that just personality, or is that biology?
So, okay. So now it gets a little more complicated, but okay. Flow is a state of optimal performance, right? It is how evolution shaped us to perform at our best, right? And when we say flow, just for, broader perspective, I'm talking about those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You get so focused on the task at hand that everything else just seems to disappear. Time passes strangely. It speeds up. 5 hours go by in like 5 minutes, right? Sometimes it slows down. Self disappears. Self-criticism, that inner critic, goes really quiet. And all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof. And flow states, turns out, have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. First is really obvious. The meta idea here is really simple, that flow follows focus. It can only show up when all of our attention is focused on the right here, right now. So what all these triggers do, they drive attention to the present moment. So the golden rule of flow, the most important of all the triggers discovered by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi back in the 70s, extremely well validated, is what's known as the challenge skills balance. We pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds our skill set. You want to stretch, but not snap, right? And there's a sweet spot. So the answer to your question is more complicated, because yes, you want to be facing your fears, but you want to be doing it inside that stretch but no snap bandwidth, right? And we talk about this emotionally. We say that midpoint is not on, but very near the midpoint between boredom and anxiety. Boredom is there's not enough stimulation here. I'm not paying any attention. Anxiety, whoa, way too much, right? I'm paying too much attention. In between is what researchers call the flow channel. Right, physiologists call it the Erbs-Dobson curve. There's a bunch of different names for it, but but it's the golden rule for flow. And so if you can stay in this channel, I am constantly challenging myself. I'm outside my comfort zone, as you're talking about, but you're not too far outside your comfort zone. And this, by the way, is another thing that's tricky. You want to set really high, hard goals, big, huge, audacious goals, right? Also important for entrepreneurs, but you need to chunk them down. So what you're doing today is just a little bit outside your sweet spot. Setting up a high, hard goal, standard motivation theory tells you, gives you a 10 to 25% boost in motivation. That's kind of huge, right? At the upper end of that, that's like getting 2 hours of free work a day if you work an 8-hour day, simply for having like a goal around like the problem you're trying to solve. That's a big thing. But if that is a huge, huge goal, right? I want to write the great American novel. Well, you can't do that today. Today, you can write 750 good words of that great American novel. That's a much more chunked down, manageable goal that keeps you inside that challenge skills sweet spot. So the answer is yes, right? Like your Doritos are keeping you inside that challenge skills sweet spot, right? It's right there, uncomfortable, right? But you can do it. So it's leading to sort of traumatic growth in a sense, right? That's where it's taking you. And there's a whole literature on this, right? On traumatic growth and these ideas. If you were to, I don't know what your super weaknesses are, maybe it's Doritos, but maybe if I put a full buffet of chocolate eclairs and donuts and everything else in front of you every day, that might tip you out, right? Like you might be like, okay, no, this is overwhelmed. Now I'm anxious around this. This is no longer working. But the bag of Doritos, right? And probably the bag of the Doritos is the fact that like you've got 1 million people tuning in all the time to notice that the bag hasn't moved and it hasn't been opened and you haven't cheated, right? That keeps you right there in that sweet spot. But it would be, my loose diagnostic.
As you were talking about all those sweets, my mouth is watering so much I might
I'm
start
sorry,
drooling.
man.
No, but here's what I do. This is great. Like I switch it to say it's the best. Like if that was right in front of me, here's what I would do. I would pick it up, just smell in all of the goodness, and then put it down and walk away. And then like pat myself on the back to say I'm amazing for doing that. So
and, I mean, I love, that's how you do it. I don't have that kind of relationship with temptation. I need it a little farther away from me. Actually, I don't think but I will tell you, both as a writer and as an athlete, I'll give you an example. I ski a lot, and I absolutely hate I hate being afraid to do something. I cannot live with the feeling of being afraid. Most of the time I have to go right at it. And going right at that fear over and over and over again is both how I progressed as a writer and as an athlete, right, over my whole career. And it's how everybody does. So I don't think we get better any other way, right? You've chosen to wrestle this particular demon in terms of food, right? I wrestle it different ways, but I think everybody has different demons is my point here.
But are you saying we have to do it? Like attacking fear is biological? It's inside everybody? I
think, so first of all, this is not my work. This is my friend Andrew Huberman's work at Stanford. He's a neuroscientist at Stanford. So Andrew discovered that the fight or flight response in the brain is actually sort of split. And we have a fight response, then we have a freeze and flee response, and there's sort of separate pathways. We love activating the fight response. It produces a tremendous amount of pleasure. We like that experience of fighting back, of standing up to a challenge. So that there is some biology there for sure. I just believe, and I think you do too, that risk taking is fundamental to doing amazing things in this world. It just is, right? And going at your fear is foundational. That, you were talking earlier about creative genius. One of the things that we know, if you just go to the simplest psychological definition of creativity, which is the creation of ideas that are novel and useful. The useful part means you got to introduce you to the world. You got to say, hey world, here's what I came up with. What do you think? Is it useful? That is always going to be scary, no matter what. So risk-taking is sort of built into innovation. And I think innovation is built into survival. So on those levels, yeah, absolutely. I'm saying this is biological. I also think from a peak performance perspective, if you can't, you just have to learn to take risks over and over and over again. In fact, one of the things we know about one of the downsides of flow, they say, is that and this was work done in Germany, the more access to flow you get, one of the things, because of this challenge skills balance, we know over time you will keep taking bigger and bigger risks. So if flow is the state of optimal performance, right, and you want to keep getting into flow, you have to sort of keep taking bigger and bigger and bigger risks as you go along. And that's just part of it. I think it sort of comes with it.
Because your comfort zone is expanding.
Because your comfort zone is expanding.
Right.
And I also think, and I think you might agree with me, the thing that I'm really interested in these days a lot, and you can see it in a lot of the people you talk to, one-hit wonders are sort of all over the place, especially with the internet now, right? But like a long, sustained creative career, which isn't about a first act or a second act, it's a third act, fourth act, fifth act, sixth act, constant self-reinvention, right? That comes with constantly finding new challenges. And I also think anybody I've ever met who has actually accomplished the impossible, right, done what we've never done before, has gone through that gauntlet as well.
Every Beatles album was different.
They really had to reinvent themselves.
Well, like greatest or one of the greatest of all time. Flow. So this is what's interesting for me, because in all my research on you, it's talking about flow state and the books and the videos and the talks. How do you balance flow, which is very in the present, in the moment, losing hours, and your book, which is talking about the future that's coming, right? The future is faster than you think. So how do you make that marriage?
So let me be really clear on two big picture ways. One is, I always say, whenever you see the impossible become possible, you see two things, right? You see people learning to harness disruptive accelerating technology, and you see people finding ways to expand human capability. Those two things come together. That's how you get the impossible. I also think, The Future is Faster Than You Think is a book about massive acceleration in technology, massive acceleration in society, the remaking of pretty much every industry over the next 10 years. It's about exponential growth. Problem, we have linear brains. Literally, our brains evolved in an era that was local and linear, right? Local meaning everything we dealt with was one day's walk away. Linear rate of change was really slow. It's global and exponential today. And the brain literally cannot keep up. We have what's known as a linear bias. It's a cognitive bias that doesn't allow us to see exponential growth, on and on and on. In fact, here's a funny thing. So if I say, Evan, imagine, just close your eyes for half a second and imagine yourself 10 years from now. Just see what you're wearing, see what you're doing. Okay? Open your eyes now. So when you think about yourself, right? If I say, Evan, think about yourself right now, your medial prefrontal cortex, part of the brain that's right here, is going to get active. This is sort of creative self-expression. It gets really active when we think about ourselves. When we think about other people, it tends to shut off. And like you think about loved ones, and it deactivates a little bit more, and then associates a little bit further. Distant strangers, it's totally shut down. When you think about the you that you're going to become in 10 years, that portion of the brain shuts down. In other words, future you is not you. Now, psychologically, this is why we have a hard time staying on diets or getting prostate exams or saving for retirement, because the you who's going to benefit most from that stuff is literally not you from a neurobiological perspective. And most of us have roughly 6 month time horizons. We're sort of good at stretching it out a little bit farther. We can do it, but at 10 years, we're almost all gone. We just can't see farther into the future. So we've got local and linear brains. We don't project well into the future. In fact, when we start trying to think about the future, we turn off. This is really, really problematic. The only time that's not true appears to be in flow. In flow, the neurochemicals that produce the state surround the brain's information processing machinery. So we take in more data per second. Data acquisition, information acquisition goes up. We pay more attention to that data. So salience increases. We find faster connections between the incoming information and older ideas. So both pattern recognition and lateral thinking, that outside the box thinking, goes way up. This is why creativity goes up in flow. But what it means is that when we're in flow, it's sort of the only time the brain can think at speed and at scale. In fact, interestingly, because our sense of self and self-consciousness disappears in flow, we can actually see farther into the future and keep the medial prefrontal cortex active. So it appears to be the way we get around this, which is not surprising, because it appears that flow is how evolution shaped the brain to innovate, right? It's massively amplified learning, creativity, motivation. It's an innovator's dream, collaboration, cooperation. All that stuff is really amped up. We do our best innovating in flow, and this is what the data shows, right? Anytime you see a paradigm shifting breakthrough, you're seeing a flow state. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I hope I got close.
No, I like it. I like the extra context. I guess for people listening and they're trying to make this practical, this is where the future is going. What do I do right now? Because you cover pretty much every industry and every trend that's happening, that's coming up. Great. I'm an entrepreneur. What am I going to do right now so that I'm not just distracted by, yes, we're all going to, upload our consciousness into Android.
Oh, yeah, of course. No, what you want to know, and this is the cool thing about exponential growth, is it follows a linear, a predictable pattern. Like, we know where it's going to go. We have, full maps on it. And, the fast answer is the self-serving answer is read the book, because you absolutely have to understand what's coming. There's no way, right? This book was written, especially for entrepreneurs, to prepare them for the future. Here's the future. These are all the opportunities. And they're like, my favorite example in the book is some of the opportunities for entrepreneurs. One of the reasons it's so important to kind of get where the technology is going, and by the way, figure out how to get into flow so we can utilize all this stuff. But where a lot of the opportunity is in these weird mashup markets. That's what we're seeing. Mm-hmm. So a bunch of years ago, I was giving a speech at NBC, and I was talking to them about where their business was going. And so at the Flow Research Collective, we have a bunch of neuroscientists on our board, and we work with, and one of them is Adam Gazzaley. He's at University of California in San Francisco. And this year, 2020, next year, 2020, Adam has a video game coming out that literally treats cognitive decline in adults. So in older adults, it can take 60-year-old brains and sort of reset small parts of them to the brains of a 20-year-old. And it's going to be FDA, it's already FDA approved. So it means you're going to go to the doctor, you've got aging, right? Signs of aging. And the doctor is going to say, okay, go home and play this video game an hour a day for the next 3 weeks, right? And that's how we're going to treat it. It's not a pill, it's a video game. So what I told the NBC, I was like, this is where we are right now, today, right? 2030, let me ask you a question. Are you going to go to the movies, or are you going to go to the movie that makes you smarter? Are you going to play a video game, or are you going to play a video game that treats something? Healthcare and entertainment are coming together in a way that nobody really saw coming, but it's happening. We're getting mashup markets sitting between, right? So 10 years from now, an entertainment company and a neuroscience company, sort of the same thing, right? So we have to know where the future, where these things are going, just so you can understand, oh my God, these are the crazy opportunities, right? Like, so you need that. And then I think you need to know how to get into flow, which is entirely trainable. That's one of the things that we've discovered to really maximize these things. To me, it's a two-step formula. And I don't think Peter Diamandis, my co-author, would disagree at all. Like, self-education and training seems to be the only way you can get in front of this stuff.
It's amazing. It's crazy how time flies when you're having fun. I didn't know quite where the interview would go, but I was strapped in for a wild ride, and you definitely delivered. The book is called The Future is Faster Than You Think. We're going to link it up in the description below. Go check it out. Steven, really appreciate your insights, and thank you for making this book too.
Thank you, Evan. Fun to be with you.
Take care. If you want to know why your comfort zone is destroying your life, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.